The Cathar did not arrive in the Sol system with fire and fury, but with the quiet, smug arrogance of landlords coming to survey a property long since condemned. A century had passed since their great triumph. A century since their elegantly engineered plagues had swept through the boisterous, chaotic human worlds, silencing them with terrifying efficiency. Now they had returned not as conquerors, but as inheritors. On the command deck of the Imperium flagship, Indomitable Will, Fleetmaster Boral stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture a testament to rigid certainty. His scarred gray chitin, particularly around the mandible and brow, marked him as a veteran of that ancient war. Below him, the planet Earth turned with infuriating serenity, a swirl of blue, white, and green that was, to Boral, nothing more than the grandest prize in a system already won. "It looks just as it did," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "Pestilent, overly wet, at least the infestation has been purged." Beside him, Subjugator Kale kept his gaze fixed on the main tactical display. Kale was younger, his black chitin smooth and unmarred, his movements fluid where Boral's were locked in place by age and pride. "Scans confirm, Fleetmaster. No industrial output, no high-frequency communications. Life signs are consistent with pre-sapient flora and fauna only. They are gone." A low chuckle circulated among the bridge officers. They were the children and grandchildren of the warriors who had fought humanity. They had been raised on stories of the campaign, of human tenacity, yes, but ultimately of their biological fragility, a fatal flaw the Cthar had exploited without mercy. This mission was their birthright, the claiming of a fallow garden. 100 years, Boral mused, his lips pulling back from his teeth in what passed for a Cathar smile. "We gave them a century to rot back into the soil, a generous gesture." He turned from the viewport, his shadow falling across the polished crimson deck. "Phase 1. Dispatch the resource scouts to the belt. Begin primary colonization surveys on the 4th planet. I want the atmospheric processors grounded by the next cycle." "At once, Fleetmaster," Kale affirmed, turning to relay the orders. Consoles chirped as commands flowed from the flagship to the dozens of vessels that comprised the colonization fleet. Massive freighters, bristling with terraforming equipment, adjusted their vectors. Sleek corvettes broke formation, their engines flaring as they accelerated toward the distant, dusty band of the asteroid belt. The fleet moved with a practiced, unhurried confidence. There was no enemy to consider, no threat to anticipate. The silence from the system was their assurance. Boral watched the display, a map of red Cthar icons moving with impunity through the void. He remembered the final transmissions from the humans, a century dead. Desperate pleas, followed by enraged threats, followed by a terrifying final quiet. They had been loud, emotional creatures. Their silence now was the most profound proof of their extinction. He had personally authorized the release of the xenophage C7 over their primary colonies. He had watched the casualty reports climb into the billions. It was the crowning achievement of his career. This return was little more than a victory lap. "Subjugator," Boral said, his voice laced with casual authority. "Have the long-range comms array broadcast the Imperial Proclamation of Annexation, standard frequency, system-wide. Let the dust and rocks know who their new masters are." Kale's mandibles tightened for a fraction of a second, the only sign of his dissent. It was a pointless, prideful gesture. "As you command, Fleetmaster." A junior officer at the communications station carried out the order. A powerful signal, carrying the droning, formal language of Cathar conquest, began to saturate the Sol system. It was a message intended for no one, a shout into an empty room. The fleet moved on, secure in its power, leaving the silent blue planet behind as it prepared to carve a new dominion from the ruins of the old. The silence, however, was about to be broken. The first hint of trouble was so insignificant it was almost discarded as a processing error. A junior sensor technician, his claws tapping nervously at the edge of his console, requested Subjugator Kale's attention. "Subjugator," he began, his voice hesitant, "I have anomalous readings from the belt." Kale moved to the station, his eyes scanning the data stream. "Define anomalous." "Minor gravimetric distortions, sir. Faint energy signatures. They are consistent with debris from the old war, but their trajectories, they are not random. They appear correlated." The technician highlighted a dozen points of light on the tactical display, each representing a small asteroid. Their paths were shifting subtly in what seemed to be a coordinated pattern. Fleetmaster Borel overheard from his command chair. He let out a short, percussive snort of derision. "Sensor ghosts. The system is filled with a century of their metallic refuse. Recalibrate your instruments and clear the board." "Fleetmaster," Cale interjected, his voice level and respectful but firm. "The probability of a dozen random debris fields mimicking a coordinated trajectory adjustment is statistically negligible. The energy readings, however faint, are consistent with low-power cold fusion cores." Borel turned his head slowly, fixing Cale with a glare. "Are you suggesting the humans left their space junk powered on? For 100 years? They were a wasteful species, subjugator, but not that foolish. I am suggesting we investigate the anomaly before sending our unarmed resource tenders into the field," Cale countered. The Fleetmaster's contempt was palpable. He saw this as a challenge, a younger officer's attempt to sow caution where none was needed. Pride warred with the barest minimum of military procedure. He would indulge the subjugator, but only to prove him wrong. "Fine," Borel snapped. "Dispatch a single corvette. The Stalker's Eye is closest. Have them investigate the largest of your anomalies. I want a full visual report. When they find nothing but pockmarked rock, you will personally apologize to the technician for wasting the Imperium's time." "Yes, Fleetmaster," Cale relayed the order without betraying any emotion. Aboard the Cathar scout corvette Stalker's Eye, Pilot Vorn and co-pilot Grack received the command with matching groans. Their ship was a cramped, utilitarian vessel designed for speed and stealth, not geological surveys. "Chasing rocks," Vorn grumbled, banking the ship into a new vector. "The Fleetmaster has us on a fool's errand." "Subjugator Keel is just overly cautious," Grack replied, his claws dancing over the navigation console. "He sees phantoms in every shadow. At least it's a break from formation flying." They sped toward their target, a particularly large, dark asteroid designated A227. It was oblong, misshapen, and tumbling slowly on its axis, like every other piece of debris in the belt. The journey took less than an hour, the star-dusted blackness of space broken only by the distant glare of the sun. As they closed the distance, their short-range sensors confirmed the earlier readings. It was dense, rich in heavy metals, and emitted a bafflingly low-level energy signature. "There it is," Vorn announced, his voice thick with boredom. The main view screen filled with the image of the asteroid. It was unremarkable, miles of cratered, lifeless rock. "Beginning visual scan. Let's get this over with." The corvette's external cameras zoomed in, sweeping across the rugged surface. Grack monitored the incoming data streams. High iron and titanium content. Surface is heavily pitted with micrometeoroid impacts. No signs of structures, weapons, or anything. "Exactly as expected," Vorn said, leaning back in his seat. He keyed the comms channel to the flagship. "Stalker's Eye to Indomitable Will. We have visual on the target. It is, as predicted, a rock, requesting permission to return to." He trailed off. Grack had gone silent beside him. Vorn turned to look at his co-pilot, who was staring intently at the view screen, his mandibles slightly agape. "Grack, what is it?" "The surface," Grack whispered. "The cracks—" Vorn looked back at the screen. A thin, dark line had appeared on the asteroid's surface. It wasn't a natural fissure. It was too straight, too perfect. As they watched, another line appeared, intersecting the first, then another and another, spreading across the asteroid's face like a web. They were the clean, precise edges of enormous, hidden panels. "That's not natural," Vorn breathed. He grabbed the controls, his earlier boredom replaced with a surge of adrenaline. "Flagship, we have something here. The target is not what it seems. I repeat, the target is—" He never finished the sentence. One of the massive panels on the asteroid's surface slid back with impossible speed, revealing a cavernous darkness within. From that darkness, something gleamed. A weapon turret, colossal in scale, swiveled with silent, deadly grace, and fixed directly on the Stalker's Eye. The two pilots aboard the Stalker's Eye were frozen for a fatal half-second, their minds unable to reconcile the image on their screen with 100 years of doctrine. Rocks did not have weapon emplacements. Dead species did not lay traps. Then a lance of pure, coherent energy, blindingly white and utterly silent in the vacuum of space, erupted from the turret. It crossed the distance between the asteroid and the corvette in an instant. The Cathar vessel's shields flared for a nanosecond, a brilliant, pathetic bubble before they were overwhelmed. The energy beam struck the cockpit, and the Stalker's eye, along with its crew and their frantic, unfinished warning, ceased to exist. It didn't explode in a dramatic fireball. It was simply gone, its matter converted to incandescent gas that dissipated into the void. On the bridge of the Indomitable Will, the effect was less dramatic, but no less chilling. The small red icon representing the Stalker's eye on the main tactical display blinked once, then vanished. A heavy silence descended upon the command deck. Every officer stared at the empty space on the map where their corvette had been. The junior technician from the sensor station looked pale, his claws frozen above his console. "Report," Fleetmaster Borel commanded, his voice tight. "Contact lost, Fleetmaster," the comms officer stated, his tone strained. "The Stalker's eye is gone. No distress signal, no wreckage." Subjugator Kale stepped forward, his eyes locked on the position of the asteroid A227. "Sensor station. Status of the anomaly." "Sir," the technician stammered, his claws flying across his control surface, "the energy signature from the target is rising, exponentially. And its mass designation, it's changing. I don't understand. The rock is shedding." As he spoke, a new icon flared to life on the tactical map, replacing the vanished corvette. It was enormous, dwarfing the symbol for a Cathar battlecruiser. Its designator was unfamiliar, a shape and class they had never encountered. It was sleek, angular, and hostile. The smug certainty that had filled the bridge moments before curdled into a thick, throat-clogging dread. The quiet laughter was replaced by the sharp, indrawn breaths of seasoned warriors facing something they could not comprehend. "What is that?" Borel's voice was a low growl, the arrogance stripped away, leaving only raw, disbelieving fury. "What am I looking at?" "A warship, Fleetmaster," Kale said, his voice grim. "Human." The word hung in the air, an impossibility. The humans were dead. Their ships were rust and ruin, scattered across the system from a war a century gone. They did not have dreadnoughts hidden inside asteroids. "Full alert," Borel roared, his composure finally shattering. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the deck. "Battle stations! Get me a full threat assessment on that vessel now! Communications on screen!" The main view screen flickered, the image of the serene Earth replaced by a magnified view of the distant asteroid. Even from millions of miles away, the change was obvious. The rocky, irregular shell of A227 was cracking and falling away in huge sections, like a disguise being discarded. Beneath the stone was a hull of night-black metal, angled and sharp, designed to deflect sensors and munitions with equal ease. Gun ports slid open along its flanks, revealing the maws of weapons that dwarfed anything in the Cathar fleet. It was a super-dreadnought, a slumbering leviathan that had just been woken. The smiles were gone. The victory lap was over. On the faces of the Cathar veterans and their eager children, a new, ancient expression was dawning: fear. They were no longer inheritors surveying an empty house. They were intruders who had just kicked down the door of a fortress. Borel stared at the impossible ship taking shape on his screen, his knuckles turning white where he gripped the edge of his command console. 100 years of assured victory had become a lie in the space of 10 seconds. The enemy had been waiting. The revelation of the single human dreadnought sent a shockwave of panic through the Cathar fleet, but Fleetmaster Borel, his initial shock hardening into pure rage, quickly regained his command. This was an insult, a trick, the desperate dying act of a species that refused to accept its own extinction. "First and second assault wings," Borel bellowed, his voice resonating with restored authority across the bridge. "Intercept and destroy that relic. I want it reduced to atoms." 6 Cathar battlecruisers, the pride of the fleet, broke from their formations. Their powerful engines burned crimson against the black, propelling them toward the lone silent ship that had emerged from its rocky tomb. On the Indomitable Will's tactical display, their icons converged on the massive human vessel, a pack of predators moving in for the kill. It was a single ship, however large. It could not possibly stand against a coordinated assault from 6 of their best. But the dreadnought was not alone. As the Cathar cruisers closed the distance, the single hostile icon on the tactical map was joined by another, then 10, then 100, then 1,000. Across the entire breadth of the asteroid belt, a silent, synchronized awakening was taking place. What the Cathar had dismissed as lifeless rock and debris came alive. Moon-sized asteroids cracked open, their stony crusts peeling back to reveal fortified battle stations, their surfaces bristling with missile pods and energy cannons. Smaller, kilometer-long rocks shed their camouflage, revealing the sleek, predatory forms of destroyers and cruisers. Fields of what had appeared to be gravel and dust resolved into swarms of thousands upon thousands of fighter-sized drones, their engines igniting in silent, cold unison. The Ghost Fleet had risen. The Cathar fleet was paralyzed. Their screens, once clean and orderly, were now a chaotic swarm of hostile contacts. The enemy wasn't in front of them, it was all around them. They had flown their entire colonization force into the heart of the most elaborate ambush in galactic history. Before Boral could even process the scale of the trap, the Ghost Fleet attacked. There was no declaration of war, no battle cry. There was only the cold, hard logic of a pre-programmed slaughter. From the flanks of the Cathar formation, human destroyers fired coordinated volleys of kinetic slugs. The tungsten rods, accelerated to near-light speed, were invisible to the naked eye. They struck the unsuspecting Cathar tenders and freighters with devastating force. Hulls designed to withstand micrometeoroids and radiation offered no resistance. They were punctured through and through, silent explosions of atmosphere and debris marking their deaths. Simultaneously, the larger dreadnoughts and battle stations opened fire. Their primary weapons weren't clumsy explosive torpedoes, but beams of focused energy and graviton pulses that bypassed shields as if they were not there. A Cathar cruiser, its captain still screaming orders, was caught in a graviton shear and simply twisted apart, its spine broken, its sections tumbling away into the void. The drone swarms descended upon the Cathar assault wings. They moved not like individual pilots, but like a single thinking organism, their movements perfectly synchronized. They didn't engage in dogfights. They performed instantaneous, multi-vector executions, overwhelming a battlecruiser's point defense systems with thousands of simultaneous threats, then firing pinpoint lasers into its engines and bridge. On the indomitable Will, chaos reigned. Officers shouted conflicting reports. Alarms blared. The tactical map was a nightmare of flashing red icons as Cathar ships were crippled or destroyed. Their rigid, hierarchical command structure was useless against a decentralized, leaderless enemy that attacked from every direction at once. Boral stood frozen, watching the systematic dismantling of his fleet. This was not a battle. It was an extermination, carried out with the passionless efficiency of a machine. They were fighting an echo, a century-old plan of vengeance executing with flawless, terrifying precision. He finally understood. The humans hadn't just laid a trap. They had weaponized the entire asteroid belt. They had built their Superdreadnoughts, and then they had hidden them in plain sight. He had led his people into a graveyard. Realizing the immediate danger, he knew there was only one path to survival. They had to decapitate the snake. All remaining forces, he roared over the cacophony, disregard the smaller ships. Concentrate all fire on the primary target, the big one. Destroy their command ship. It was a desperate, perhaps foolish gambit, but it was the only one Boral had left. The Ghost Fleet, for all its terrifying coordination, had to have a central command nexus. The first dreadnought to reveal itself, the largest of the Leviathans, was the only logical candidate. Destroy it, Boral reasoned, and the automated swarm might fall into disarray. The surviving Cathar warships, battered and bleeding, pivoted to obey. Ignoring the drone swarms nipping at their flanks and the destroyers surgically disabling their supply ships, they focused the entirety of their remaining firepower on the lead human dreadnought. The space around the colossal ship, now designated Vigilance on the Cathar tactical boards, became a storm of plasma bolts and laser fire. The dreadnought's shields flared, a vast dome of shimmering energy that absorbed the onslaught. But the concentrated fire of 24 Cathar capital ships was immense. The shield began to flicker, buckling under the strain. Red-hot plasma scored deep, molten trenches across the black hull. On the bridge of the indomitable Will, Kale reported the effect. "Their shields are at 30%, Fleetmaster. We are breaking through." "Fire the boarding torpedoes," Boral commanded, his voice raw. "I want a team on that bridge. Find its machine core and tear it out." Two heavy torpedoes, their warheads replaced with armored drills and troop bays, streaked toward the Vigilance. One was vaporized by the Dreadnought's point defense grid, but the second, shielded by a barrage of covering fire, slammed into a weakened section of the hull. The drill roared to life, cutting through the meter-thick armor plating with a spray of white-hot metal. A sealed tube extended, locking onto the breach, and a squad of the Imperium's elite shock troops poured into the dead ship. They found themselves in a cavernous, dark corridor, lit only by the emergency strobes of their helmet lamps. The air was cold, thin, and still. There was no sign of life. "Move," the squad leader commanded. "Objective is the command center. Expect automated defenses." His words were prophetic. As they advanced down the main conduit, hidden turrets descended from the ceiling, spitting deadly shards of metal. The Cathar returned fire, their plasma rifles melting the turrets into slag, but not before two of their number fell. They pressed on, blasting through sealed bulkheads, navigating a maze of silent, intersecting passageways. The ship felt less like an enemy vessel and more like a tomb that was actively resisting their presence. After a grueling 10-minute firefight against the ship's internal systems, they reached their objective, a set of massive, reinforced blast doors. They planted breaching charges. The explosion ripped the doors from their moorings, revealing the bridge beyond. It was vast, dark, and utterly silent. There was no crew, no bustling officers. The command stations were inert, the screens dark. The center of the cavernous room was dominated by a raised circular platform, and on it a single object that drew every eye. It was a pod, sleek and white, covered in a thick layer of frost. Wires and conduits snaked from its base, connecting it to the very heart of the ship's systems. This had to be it, the central computer, the AI core. The squad leader and two of his remaining soldiers advanced, their rifles raised. This was the brain of the Ghost Fleet. As they stepped onto the platform, their presence triggered a new protocol. A soft hiss broke the silence. The frost on the pod's canopy began to melt, revealing a glass-like surface beneath. Inside, bathed in a soft blue light, was not a matrix of circuits and processors, but a figure, a human. He was pale, his features sharp and still. Tubes and wires were connected to ports on his temples and arms. As the last of the frost sublimated, the pod seals disengaged with a pneumatic sigh. The canopy retracted. The man's eyes snapped open. They were gray, wide, with a profound and absolute shock that transcended mere fear. He took a ragged, desperate gasp, his lungs seizing on the first taste of unrecycled air in a century. His gaze darted from the armored, monstrous figures surrounding him to the blaring, silent alarms flashing on a console he could see from within the pod. He was not a warrior awakening to battle. He was a sleeper, violently ripped from a dream into a waking nightmare. The lead Cathar warrior, recovering from his shock, leveled his rifle at the chest of the helpless, bewildered human. On the distant bridge of the Indomitable Will, Subjugator Kale turned to his fleet master. "Sir, the enemy fleet, it has stopped firing. All of it." Gregory's first sensation was pain, a cold, burning agony in his lungs as they drew their first breath in 100 years. His second was a deafening symphony of alarms that blared not in the room but directly inside his skull. His third and most terrifying was the sight of the alien soldiers, their forms hulking and monstrous in the dim light, their weapons all aimed at his heart. His mind was a fog, a chaotic soup of fragmented memories and the icy sludge of a century of cryostasis. He tried to move, to scramble out of the pod, but his muscles screamed in protest, weak and atrophied. He was trapped, helpless, and utterly confused. Who were these creatures? Where was he? A voice, calm and melodic, cut through the noise in his head. It was a woman's voice, yet it held a resonant timbre that was more than human. "Governor, welcome. Apologies for the abrupt awakening. Your presence is required." As the voice spoke, a pillar of cool blue light coalesced beside the cryopod. It solidified into the form of a woman, her body a shimmering, semi-transparent construct of data streams and light. Her face was serene, beautiful, but her eyes held the intensity of a star. Gregory stared at her, then back at the Cathar, who had taken a hesitant step back, startled by the sudden apparition. "Governor?" he croaked, his own voice alien to him. "What?" "I am Alara," the Avatar said, her transmission bypassing his ears and feeding directly into the neural interface at his temples. "Warden AI of the Sol Defense Network, designated Vigilance 1. You are Engineer First Class Gregory, the network's appointed ethical governor. A Car Imperium fleet has entered the system in violation of the Sol Treaty. Their biosignature and tactical profile triggered Contingency 7 Gamma, the human override." The words were a data stream, flooding his foggy consciousness with information he couldn't process. Sol Defense Network, Cathar, Governor. It was all nonsense. He was an engineer. He helped design the tertiary systems for the network's long-term maintenance. He remembered the project, the final activation, then volunteering for the stasis program. It was supposed to be a short-term trial. The network's automated protocols were sufficient until the invaders initiated a direct boarding action on this vessel, Alara continued, her tone unchangingly calm, even as the Cathar began to advance again. The act of attempting to seize the ethical core necessitated the core's activation. "That is you, Governor. The Ghost Fleet has paused its assault and awaits your command." The Ghost Fleet? The name they'd jokingly called the network during construction. It was real. The Thar were real. A century, had it really been a century? The lead Thar warrior barked an order in a guttural language Gregory didn't understand, and the squad charged. The moment of hesitation was over. Gregory finally managed to haul himself over the edge of the pod, his legs collapsing under him as he hit the deck. Pain shot through his knees. He was weak, a newborn in a firefight. "Command authority is yours, Governor," Ilara's voice stated in his mind. "This vessel and the entirety of the fleet await your instruction. Threat is imminent." Instruction? He wasn't a commander. He was an engineer. He couldn't fight these things. He pushed himself backward, his hands scraping against the cold deck, his eyes darting around the bridge for an escape that didn't exist. The Cathar were almost upon him. His gaze fell on a nearby wall panel, its cover stenciled with a familiar designation, CFMS, Coolant Flow and Maintenance Systems. A system he knew, a system he had helped design. Desperation is the mother of ingenuity. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew this ship. He knew how it breathed. He screamed, his voice raw, not at the Cathar, but into the open air, trusting the ship was listening. "Alara, override life support protocols in Corridor Gamma 7, right outside this door. Full coolant purge, now." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, from the corridor beyond the breached blast doors, came a series of sharp, guttural screams. A thick white vapor, dense as smoke and colder than the void, billowed into the bridge. The Cathar warriors at the back of the formation were instantly encased in a rapidly forming layer of frost, their movements slowing to a halt before they froze solid, statues of armored shock. The charge faltered, the lead soldiers turning to see what had happened to their comrades. "Coolant purge executed," Ilara's voice confirmed in his head. "Warning, an unsanctioned engineering command of this nature may cause damage to the conduit lining." "Forget the conduit!" Gregory gasped, scrambling to his feet using a console for support. His mind, spurred by pure terror and adrenaline, was beginning to clear. The data flooding his senses from Alara was starting to make sense. He could feel the ship around him, a network of systems and power relays he now had absolute authority over. "Seal the bridge," he commanded. The ruined blast doors couldn't close, but a secondary emergency bulkhead, meters thick, slammed down from the ceiling with the force of a guillotine, sealing them in. He could hear the remaining Cathar pounding on the other side. "They'll cut through it," he muttered. He looked at Alara's impassive, luminous face. "Show me the borders and show me a schematic of this deck." A section of the main view screen flickered to life, displaying a tactical overlay of the ship and the positions of the remaining Cathar. At the same time, a detailed engineering blueprint materialized in his mind's eye. He was an engineer, not a soldier, and this was an engineering problem. "Okay," he breathed, his old instincts taking over. "Alara, the maintenance drones in Sector 4. Activate them, send them to the border's position, and magnetize the deck plating in that corridor. Full power." On the other side of the bulkhead, The Cathar soldiers were setting up a plasma cutter when a swarm of small, spider-like maintenance drones swarmed out of ceiling panels, spraying lubricant and welding sparks. It wasn't an attack, but it was chaos. As the Cathar tried to swat the drones away, a powerful magnetic field erupted from the floor, locking their metal-soled boots in place. They were stuck, helpless, as Gregory, with Ilara as his instrument, continued to turn their own ship against them. He vented fire-suppressant gas, harmless but disorienting, into their corridor, then cut the gravity, sending them tumbling into a confusing zero-G mess. While Gregory was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse inside the Vigilance, the Cathar on the bridge of the Indomitable Will were witnessing a terrifying transformation. "Fleetmaster, the human fleet is moving again," Subjugator Kale reported, his voice tight with alarm. "But their tactics, they have changed." The cold, predictable logic of the Ghost Fleet's initial assault was gone. The human ships were now fighting with a terrifying, almost playful creativity. Drones that had previously attacked in rigid formations now used asteroids for cover, darting out to fire and disappearing again. A human cruiser, feigning critical damage and venting plasma, lured two Cathar battlecruisers into a pursuit, leading them directly into the crossfire of a hidden dreadnought. The fleet was no longer just a machine. It had a mind, and that mind was cunning, vicious, and unpredictable. It was human. Back on the Vigilance, Gregory had the last of the Cathar boarders cornered. He had herded them into a massive, empty cargo bay. Ilara, seal the bay doors and evacuate the atmosphere. Acknowledged. The huge doors slammed shut, and the Cathar found themselves trapped in a silent, airless prison. Their suit radios were useless, their mission a total failure. Gregory stood on his bridge, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. He leaned heavily on the central console. He had survived. More than that, he had won. He looked at the main tactical screen, at the Cathar fleet, now in complete disarray. For the first time, he wasn't just a terrified engineer. He was in command. Governor, Ilara's avatar, shimmered beside him. "Boarding threat neutralized. The fleet is performing at 112% combat efficiency under your guidance. What are your orders?" Gregory stared at the tactical display. The red icons of the Cathar fleet were scattered, many of them damaged, their formations broken. The blue icons of the Ghost Fleet held them in a tightening net. The automated protocols, Ilara's cold logic, would have been to simply finish the job. Annihilate the invaders. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had neutralized the boarders, but he hadn't killed them. They were trapped, defeated, but alive. Could he give the order to extinguish thousands of lives with a single word? His training was as an engineer. His purpose was to build, to maintain, to preserve. The ethical governor. The title suddenly made a terrifying amount of sense. The machine could fight, but it needed a human to decide when to stop. "I'm not going to destroy them," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Ilara's luminous form tilted its head, a flicker of light in her eyes, the only sign of her query. "Their continued presence constitutes a threat to the integrity of the Sol system, Governor. My primary directive is to eliminate all threats." "Our primary directive is to preserve the system, Ilara. There's a difference." He pointed a trembling finger at a Cathar cruiser on the screen. "Target that ship. Isolate its primary weapons array and its main engine block. Can you disable them with precision energy strikes without breaching the hull?" The particle lances have a surgical strike capability. The probability of zero casualties is 98.7%. It is a highly inefficient use of a primary weapon system. "Do it," Gregory ordered. In the void, one of the Ghost Fleet's destroyers adjusted its aim. It fired two brief, impossibly precise beams of energy. On the targeted Cathar cruiser, there was no explosion. Instead, the ship's weapon ports sparked and went dark, and the brilliant crimson glow of its engines sputtered and died. The vessel went inert, drifting helplessly, its crew alive but utterly defeated. Gregory watched for a moment, his heart pounding. It worked. "Do it again," he commanded, "to that one." Another Cathar ship was surgically castrated, its claws removed without killing the beast. Then another and another. The message was being sent, not with a roar, but with a terrifyingly calm demonstration of superiority. "Now," Gregory said, taking a deep breath, "open a channel to the Cathar flagship, audio only." A crackle of static filled the bridge of the indomitable will. Then a voice, human and clear, spoke in perfect, unaccented Caithar. "This is Governor Gregory of the Sol Defense Network. Cease your advance, disarm your weapons, your invasion is over." Fleetmaster Boral, who had been watching his ships being disabled one by one, stared at his comms unit in disbelief. "A human?" he snarled. "One human in a tin can dares to challenge the Imperium?" He slammed his fist on the console. "You are a ghost, an echo, you have no right!" Gregory listened to the tirade without emotion. While Boral was consumed by his rage, Gregory gave another silent command to Alara. A swarm of thousands of drones, which had been holding a wide perimeter, suddenly converged on the indomitable will. They didn't fire. They simply surrounded the flagship in a dense, silent cloud, their engines glowing with cold blue light. Then they all activated their sensor arrays at once, focusing them on the flagship. On Boral's bridge, every system flickered. Consoles died and rebooted. Lights dimmed and flared. The air crackled with static discharge. It was a non-violent assault, an overwhelming flood of energy that demonstrated an absolute, crushing technological dominance. The Fleetmaster's rant died in his throat. His entire bridge crew stared at their flickering screens, the reality of their situation finally sinking past their pride. "I am not offering you a battle, Fleetmaster." Gregory's voice cut through the electronic chaos, calm and steady. "I am showing you the result. My only goal is to preserve this system. Your lives are only forfeit if you force my hand." The drones held their position, a silent, suffocating net of potential violence. Boral was speechless. This lone human and his ghost fleet were not fighting a war the Caithar understood. They were not fighting for glory or for vengeance. They were simply winning. Subjugator Kale looked from the drone swarm on the view screen to the rigid, trembling form of his fleetmaster, and for the first time he allowed himself to question the wisdom of their great victory a century ago. The demonstration of non-lethal power did not chasten Fleetmaster Boral. It broke him. The foundation of his entire existence, the Caithar military doctrine of overwhelming force, the certainty of his victory over humanity, his own legacy, had been shattered by a single calm voice and a fleet of ghosts. Humiliation, hot and sharp, coursed through him, eclipsing reason. He would not be remembered as the Fleetmaster who was defeated by a dead species. His eyes, wild with fury, fixed on the image of Earth on a secondary monitor. The prize. If he could not have it, he would ensure this ghost could not either. "All ships!" Boral screamed, his voice cracking with madness. "All remaining ships with functional engines. Disregard the ghost fleet. Set a direct course for the third planet. Burn the engines until they melt. If we cannot have the prize, we will deny it to this phantom." The order was insane. It was a death sentence for the crews, a spiteful suicidal charge. But it was a direct command from the Fleetmaster. On the tactical map, a dozen Cathar cruisers and destroyers, the last of his operational fleet, turned their prows away from the Ghost Fleet and ignited their engines in a desperate final burn toward Earth. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Gregory watched in horror. They're running for Earth. What are they trying to do? Their trajectory indicates a high-velocity atmospheric entry, Alara stated, her voice as calm as ever. The resulting kinetic impact and radiation from their drives exploding would cause an extinction-level event. They intend to scorch the planet. Gregory felt sick. "Stop them. Alara, you have to stop them." "Intercepting with conventional weapons will destroy all Caithar vessels," Alara projected. A simulation flared on the screen, showing the Caithar ships being vaporized by particle lances. "It is the most effective tactical solution." Gregory shook his head, running a hand through his unkempt hair. No more killing. He was the ethical governor. That had to mean something. He stared at the tactical map, his engineer's mind racing, looking for a different kind of solution. He wasn't seeing the ships anymore. He was seeing the space between them, the gravity, the debris, the thousands upon thousands of asteroids that were not warships, the other half of the network. The Ghost Fleet was not just a weapon. Its secondary purpose, the one he had actually worked on, was stellar engineering, moving asteroids for mining, clearing orbital paths, a colossal system-wide construction tool. A wild, audacious idea sparked in his mind. an idea so immense in scale it felt like trying to command the tide. "Elara," he said, his voice quiet and intense, "forget the ships. What is the maximum simultaneous output of the entire network's gravitic projectors?" The AI paused for a fraction of a second. The power drain would be catastrophic. We would be operating at 400% of recommended capacity. The network would be offline for days afterward for recharge and repairs. "Can it be done?" Gregory insisted. "The calculations are complex, but possible. The margin for error is near zero." "Then do it," he said, his eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. "Plot a solution. I don't want to hit them. I want to move the board." The Ghost Fleet stopped its pursuit. The warships, from the smallest destroyer to the largest dreadnought, pivoted in unison. They did not aim their weapons at the fleeing Cathar. They aimed them at the asteroid belt itself. There was no flash of light, no explosion. There was only a silent, immense exertion of force. Across millions of miles of space, the gravitic projectors of the Ghost Fleet activated as one. They were not pulling or pushing with brute strength. They were weaving a complex web of gravitational tides, subtly and powerfully altering the orbits of tens of thousands of non-weaponized asteroids and debris fields. Aboard the Cathar ships making their death charge, the pilots saw something impossible on their view screens. The stars ahead were being blotted out. The asteroid belt which they had left behind them was now somehow in front of them. It wasn't an orderly wall. It was a churning, chaotic, and impenetrable storm of rock, ice, and metal, a section of the solar system's natural architecture that had been physically uprooted and thrown in their path. Their route to Earth was gone, replaced by a lethal grinding cage of physics. The charge faltered, ships desperately trying to reverse thrust, their suicidal dash turning into a panicked scramble for survival. The engineer's gambit had worked. The Cathar fleet, checkmated, was thrown into chaos. Trapped between the silent, watching Ghost Fleet and the roiling, impassable wall of rock Gregory had built, their final, spiteful charge collapsed into a series of collisions and near misses within their own panicked ranks. On the bridge of the indomitable will, the last thread of Fleet Master Boral's authority snapped. He stared at the churning debris field on his screen, his mandibles slack, his mind finally broken by a defeat he could not comprehend. He had been beaten not by superior firepower, but by superior thinking. Subjugator Kale looked at his disgraced leader, then at the grim, weary faces of the bridge crew. He drew his ceremonial sidearm, a symbol of office he had never fired, and placed its muzzle gently against Boral's temple. "Fleet Master, you are relieved of command." Boral did not resist. 2 guards escorted the old broken warrior from the bridge. The act was not mutiny. It was the triage of a dying command. Kale took the command chair, the weight of his entire fleet's failure settling on his shoulders. He looked at the tactical map, at the human fleet that held them in a cage of their own making. He saw no path to victory, only to annihilation or something else. He keyed the comms. To the human vessel, to Governor Gregory, Kale's voice was devoid of arrogance, replaced by a deep, weary respect. The Cathar Imperium requests a truce. Gregory, his body trembling with the adrenaline and exhaustion of his ordeal, listened to the request on the bridge of the Vigilance. He looked at the image of Earth on his screen, safe and untouched. He had done it. He relayed his terms, his voice steady. The Cathar would fully disarm every weapon system on every ship, supervised by the Ghost Fleet's drones. Once disarmed, they would be granted a safe corridor through the new debris field and out of the Sol system. There were no negotiations. Kale accepted without hesitation. The days that followed were tense but quiet. Gregory watched, a solitary god in his machine, as Cathar crews dismantled their own weapons under the watchful eyes of his drones. He saw them jettisoning plasma conduits and power cores into the void. He saw the prideful warrior race humbled, their great colonization fleet neutered and shamed. He felt no triumph, only a profound sadness and an immense crushing loneliness. Finally it was done. He watched on the main screen as the last of the disarmed Cathar ships was escorted through a stable channel in the debris field by a squadron of human destroyers. He watched until its crimson engine flare disappeared into the black. The system was quiet again. The Ghost Fleet, its purpose served, began to return to its hiding places, its energy reserves critically low. The asteroid belt was a chaotic mess, a testament to the battle that had been fought, but Earth was safe. Ilara's blue avatar solidified beside him. "Contingency resolved, Governor. The network is returning to automated vigilance status." Gregory didn't take his eyes off the image of the blue planet. He was the only human left, the sole inheritor of everything. He had been an engineer who helped build a shield for a world teeming with billions of people. Now he was the only one left to protect, and the only one left to be protected. The weight of it settled on him, not as a burden, but as a newfound purpose. His stasis was over. His work was not. He was the last guardian at the gate. He placed a hand on the cool metal of the console, the ship humming around him like a living thing, its systems intertwined with his own consciousness. "Not automated, Ilara," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the distant, silent Earth. "Not anymore. Our watch has just begun."